Recently, superhero films haven't been the best, which has upset a lot of fans, leading to what many believe may be the end of the genre as a whole, which has been given the name superhero fatigue. But to understand what that is, we have to go back. Ah, what a time to be alive. You see, these were truly the glory days. Of course, we didn't quite know it at the time, but films like Spider-Man 1, Batman Begins, and Iron Man would continue to be known as the best films in the genre to this day. And if you're like me, you literally grew up with these films and characters. So to say that they have a special place in our hearts is a huge understatement. To this day, I still remember that feeling of watching the first Avengers movie. I probably went to the theater well over 10 times because it was just truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And it was also the first time I had seen all of these great heroes come together. Although just 7 years later, they would manage to recreate that same feeling again, but on a much larger scale. It was truly the perfect end to the saga, which gave me hope for the future. However, that hope would quickly be shattered, as after Endgame, pretty much everything in the entire genre would feel a bit off. At the time, I remember many people stopped watching because it just felt like it was the perfect time to get off that train, but I didn't want to give up yet, because if these films taught me anything growing up, it's that when people lose their way, they can always find it again. So I waited, and for a minute there, I really thought it was going to pay off. Films like Spider-Man No Way Home, The Batman, and The Suicide Squad were really good, although what followed was much worse.
They'll never know what you sacrificed for them.
You have to stop calling them terrorists.
Well, here's the thing, Bruce. I'm great at controlling my anger. I do it all the time.
When I'm catcalled in the street, when incompetent men explain my own area of expertise to me.
See, this is when Marvel began overstuffing us with hours and hours of content, barely giving us a minute to breathe. Now, this normally would have actually been a good thing, because there's nothing wrong with having more of something you love. Although, there is a problem when that thing you love just isn't there anymore.
Is the door to Iron Man totally closed? Because I don't believe it is.
To me, starting up again is off the table. I feel I've done all I could with that character.
It's a bad feeling to fall out of love for anything, but for many of us, these characters helped us get out of tough spots, showing us that there is a beauty in the struggle no matter what it is you're going through, which is why it sucks even more to feel this way, because it's not like we want to hate on it, it just used to mean everything to us. However, now it's different, it's changing, or maybe we are. Maybe this is just part of growing up, you know, we're all graduating, getting jobs, and starting families, so maybe it's just us.
And people say superhero fatigue, but I think that what's happened is people have gotten really lazy with their superhero stories.
Wait, that's it. It's not us as fans who are tired or just growing up, it's the films themselves that have given up on us, because they think that no matter what they put out, we will all just consume it, which has honestly worked for a while, but now we are starting to see it. Marvel doesn't care about telling good stories anymore, and DC tries their hardest, but lets us down time and time again. Sadly, the good old days of Marvel are gone. Nothing can truly last forever, and there has to be an end to every story. What you're seeing now with the MCU is kind of what happens when you don't accept that. Things will just continue to feel uneventful no matter how hard you try, because the peak has already been hit. So even some of the good is just a band-aid covering up a much larger wound. Everything that Marvel has put out in the past couple years has tried its hardest to draw on a crowd like Endgame did, instead of telling very character-driven stories made from the heart like they used to. Now for a second, just imagine Doctor Strange 2 wasn't this big multiversal event, but instead a movie about Stephen Strange, really diving into the repercussions of Endgame and showing how being a Sorcerer Supreme really affects his personal life. I mean, the literal Doctor Strange What If episode was way more emotionally driven than the entire second film. Although, even when Marvel isn't trying to make something act like it's a huge event, it still underperforms. Like with the newest Secret Invasion show, which I have yet to even finish. The direction and idea of the series seemed fine. Plus, you can't go wrong with some Samuel L. Jackson's Nick Fury. Or so I thought, because that was my main issue off the jump. The character just isn't the same as before. I can't even pinpoint exactly what it is, but he just feels off. However, after seeing fans' reviews of the final episode, I highly doubt I will even finish it, especially when Marvel makes it feel like a chore to do so. Sadly, this wasn't the only show that felt like this, as both Ms. Marvel and She-Hulk did. Although after watching Ms. Marvel, I have to give it credit where it's due, because it honestly wasn't a bad watch. I personally thought it would be too childish at some parts and wouldn't really fit with me well, but it was mostly fine. They could have touched up more on her motivations and gave her a better character arc, but other than that, it was an okay show. Except for that final fight, which probably takes the cake for one of the most boring fights in Marvel history. However, that's not nearly as bad as taking the title for the literal worst thing to ever hit Disney Plus, aka She-Hulk. The creation of the show makes zero sense to me. Like, I don't understand why they felt the need to rush a new Hulk character when they haven't even done anything for Bruce in over 15 years. When Hulk does appear in someone else's stuff, they nerf him like crazy or treat him like he's completely useless. Which personally hits for me, seeing as my favorite hero growing up was originally the Hulk. These were the first animated shows I got to watch. I even had a box full of just Hulk figures. Sure, I was too little to understand just how deep and sad his character truly was, but now that I can, it just really sucks to see one of the strongest characters in Marvel get beat down on, constantly being used as the brunt of the joke. Something they took way too far in this show.
So I'm an expert at controlling my anger because I do it infinitely more than you.
When I heard this, it literally shocked me. Like, how is she going to act like he isn't the only character who attempted suicide in the MCU, and that he hasn't lost more friends than she can count on one hand? Bruce Banner is one of the most broken characters in the MCU, so that scene proved to me what this show is going to be about. But even when you ignore these ridiculous comments, there still isn't much going for this show. And I don't like to tell people that they shouldn't enjoy something, but I question your sanity if you've watched She-Hulk more than once and still enjoy yourself. Simply due to the fact that there was no story. The show literally meant nothing. Like, the entire show's plot was that some guys on the internet wanted to screw her over, so they devised a plan to steal her blood, which worked and could have been a character growth moment, as she would maybe learn not to trust random dudes on dating apps. But nope, she legit rewrote the show herself to remove Bruce from the finale completely and get rid of the entire plot that all of the episodes were building up to. But of course, some fans were still hyped over the fourth wall break. On the flip side though, DC wasn't doing much better, as they only have 3 heavy hitters in the past 4 years, that being the Joker, the Suicide Squad, and the Batman, while things like Wonder Woman 1984, Black Adam, Shazam 2, and The Flash performed horribly, all for the same reasons: bad writing. These films aren't just about telling compelling stories and creating great characters anymore. They're about using the dedicated fans to pump out a bunch of action-packed garbage, because they know that most people will just eat it up regardless. Until of course that fatigue started to set in, waking people up to the reality that the glory days of the genre are far behind us, and that all the passion for these films were used up. What sucks the most is that there's nothing we can do as the viewer, because the only reason that superhero fatigue is even a thing right now is due to horrible writing, which affects both the story and the characters, leading to very boring stuff like Ms. Marvel being put on the front line, or terrible characters like She-Hulk even existing. That's kind of why deep down it's hard for me to think that superhero fatigue is even real, for the simple fact that I really enjoyed films like Spider-Man No Way Home and The Batman, which are both on my top 10 superhero movies of all time, even though I was initially worried about Spider-Man because I thought they would just try to make it this big event, raking in all the big bucks. And while it did do both of those things, it also grounded itself in a more emotional way with the death of Aunt May. Sure, her character didn't mean much to a lot of us, because of poor writing, but it makes up for that by finally proving to Peter that there are consequences to his actions, which was very much lacking in the first 2 films, although here he learned what happens when you involve the people you love in that dangerous lifestyle.
What are you doing, May? Please, will you just wake up and talk to me, please?
When will people wake up and realize that everywhere Spider-Man goes, chaos and calamity ensue? Everything Spider-Man touches comes to ruin. And we, the innocents, are left to pick up the pieces.
Also, I thought that the reintroduction of Tobey and Andrew would only be for fan service, but I couldn't have been more wrong. They helped him get through his pain, and make him finally learn that to become Spider-Man he must take the responsibility for his actions, which was paid off tenfold in the end by them literally taking everything away from him to help him become the Amazing Spider-Man. DC pretty much did the same thing with the fun but still character and story driven film The Suicide Squad, as well as The Batman, which is one of my favorite Batman films ever. It hit pretty much every expectation I had for it. This film really brought back that good old feeling again. It didn't try its hardest to be this grand spectacle and fit into the norms of the genre. Plus, it wasn't used to push any agendas or narratives. The Batman was just purely that, the Batman, which brought back so much hope for the future of DC for me, seeing as they have confirmed that they are doing a trilogy just for this version of the Bat. Although I know a lot of people don't like James Gunn for various reasons right now, I think he is one of the only people who can truly save the genre. All 3 of the Guardians movies carried Marvel for so long, simply because they have the most heart in them. He really knows how to tell a story, but even better, he knows how to tell a great character story. James understands what many of us have forgotten. It's not these grand battles and events that make us love these films. It's the love and care that is used to craft these deeply flawed but relatable characters. This is exactly why many of us love Iron Man and could care less for Captain Marvel. One is a deeply flawed person that learned to grow into a leader, and the other was just perfect from the jump, which literally no one can relate to. Because, spoiler alert, nobody is perfect. Nevertheless, I think there is hope for the future, mostly with the reboot of the DCU, and and maybe after a couple more really good films, they will start to take over the genre, which will only force Marvel and Disney to drop their bad writing and put some passion into it, because only good things will come from competition like that. However, if I'm wrong and DC doesn't up their game, then I don't see Marvel doing it either, especially as they are already complacent with how they are running things now, which really just makes me sad for the kids that are growing up with this garbage.